Hi, I am Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research. I am joined by Erica Lutz and Stephen Kinzer. Stephen Kinzer is an investigative journalist, senior fellow in international and public affairs at Brown University, and author of multiple nonfiction books that explore intelligence operations and international intrigue. That includes his critically acclaimed 2019 work, Poisoner in Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control. He provided testimony at the recent MKUltra congressional hearing conducted by the Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets. And welcome, Stephen Kinzer.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for being here, Erica Lutz.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to today. Thank you.
So, Mr. Kinzer, in summary, what would you say the public should know about MKUltra and the CIA's operations?
You have to put yourself back in the period in which MKUltra emerged. So that was the early period of the Cold War in the early 1950s. Americans believed, or were made to believe, and many did believe, that we were under existential threat from a horrific force from overseas, in this case, international communism, and that therefore normal rules that might govern the way our intelligence agencies worked would not apply. The CIA, by misinterpreting certain events and responding to its own cultural impulses, concluded mistakenly that the enemy was on the verge of discovering the secret of mind control, or had discovered it, perhaps. So this led the CIA to launch a project, MKUltra, to find the secret of mind control. And the person who ran it, this chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, concluded with a kind of scientist's focus that before you could figure out how to insert a new mind into someone's brain, you first had to find a way to destroy the mind that was in there. So he was searching for techniques of how to destroy a human mind and a human soul and a human body. And in that pursuit, he carried out what were the most extreme experiments on human beings that have ever been undertaken by any government of any agency of the U.S. government.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Erica.
Well, I was just going to say, you talk a lot about in your work, in your book, and I've seen many lectures that you've given, but you talk a lot about the connection with Germany and working, creating the first Black site. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
When I was researching the book Poisoner in Chief, I went to Germany because although Gottlieb and his MKUltra comrades carried out many experiments inside the United States, their most extreme experiments were outside the United States. And these were carried out mainly in countries that were occupied formally or informally by the United States. And that included West Germany in the period after the Second World War. So while I was researching my book, I found in Germany what I think might be the first CIA secret prison or Black site. It's a lovely looking chateau outside of Frankfurt. And when it has been identified in the German press as, quote, the CIA torture house. And according to one account, there were deaths, but the number is unknown. So I went there, I figured out where it was. And there I found a young German businessman who had bought the house and was cutting it up into condominiums. And he was very friendly. He knew exactly what had happened in that house. And he took me down into the basement where he had his storage rooms. And he said, these were the cells where the MKUltra experimenters and their Nazi comrades together carried out those experiments, which were actually just continuations of the experiments that those Nazis had conducted only a few years earlier, just down the road. So that was a great way to see the link between what the Nazis did in the concentration camps and what the Nazi scientists who carried out those so-called experiments then later did as founding partners of MKUltra.
Do you have a date range of that beginning? Like I know MK Ultra was 1953, but of course the Hillenkoetter and the Smith administrations, were interested in Bluebird and Artichoke. And did it date pre 1953 in Germany?
We don't have a lot of details. I think West Germany was a logical place where all kinds of extreme experiments could be carried out and were. They weren't all carried out by the CIA, particularly in the immediate post-war period. The military was largely involved in this. However, you mentioned earlier that I went to testify in front of this congressional committee, and one of the recommendations I made to them was to try to compensate for the lack of documentation that we have by looking at what might be in the files in Germany. While I was researching Poisoner in Chief, I found a document that was written by the German Counterintelligence Service as a memo to the Chancellor of Germany, then Konrad Adenauer. And the intelligence agents reported that Americans were kidnapping people on German soil and then using them as subjects in experiments which were illegal under German law. So Chancellor Adenauer, who was very close with the United States, decided not to act on that memo. However, one might speculate that if those counterintelligence agents felt strongly enough about their evidence to write a memo to the chancellor, that there might be files about what led them to that conclusion. So I wonder if perhaps Germany might hold some files that would help us flesh out our knowledge of MKUltra.
You also think that there could potentially be any things that we could find at universities that were involved with some of the experiments?
I do. The interesting fact about the experiments that were carried out at universities in the United States is that at the time, almost none of them had any idea that they were working for the CIA. So one of the most interesting aspects of MKUltra has to do with these university, hospital, and clinic experiments. Sidney Gottlieb, the mastermind of MKUltra, was fascinated by LSD. He was the first LSD maven. And at one point, he actually persuaded the CIA to purchase the entire world supply of LSD. He used some of it in horrifically grotesque experiments on subjects who were totally unwitting. On the other hand, he also wanted to know what would be the effect of LSD on ordinary people who were fed it in a clinical setting with awareness of what was happening to them. Since the CIA doesn't have any of those clinical settings, Gottlieb established a couple of bogus medical foundations, which then wrote letters to these hospitals and clinics and telling them very openly, we have this new psychoactive drug, it's called LSD. What we want to do is send it to you. And all you have to do is advertise for volunteers. You tell them exactly what it is. You give them the LSD in controlled circumstances, and then you write reports for this for us, and we pay you for this. So quickly, a lot of hospitals and clinics picked up on this as a money-making venture. So who in California were among the very first people to sign up for those LSD experiments? One was Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet who went on to become one of the high priests of LSD. Another one was Ken Kesey, who wrote that book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and worked in a mental hospital for the purpose, I later discovered, of stealing the LSD because he wanted to bring it home to his friends. Robert Hunter, the songwriter for the Grateful Dead, was one of the first volunteers. He took that LSD, brought it back to the Grateful Dead. It spread out into their circles. So it was really through Gottlieb and the CIA that LSD became a major phenomenon in the United States. And the irony, of course, is that the drug that Gottlieb hoped would give the CIA the power to control the world wound up fueling a generational rebellion, which was aimed at destroying everything the CIA stands for.
Gotta love that one. So let me ask you, with regard to conspiracy theories, I know that I've heard you mention this before, that you are a journalist and you are very diligent about what you do. You don't want to speculate, that you put facts in hand and you are, basing everything off what you know to be true. So when you kind of come into contact with people that are in that conspiracy culture, how do you navigate that setting?
I can tell you that when I was researching my book, Poisoner in Chief, I realized that whenever you're researching MKUltra, you're only a few clicks away from some pretty wild fantasizing. On the other hand, the truth of MKUltra is so mind-boggling that it opens up your understanding of what constitutes a conspiracy theory and what is actually real. I ask myself, why is it that conspiracy theories are so widespread in our popular culture? And I think a good part of the reason is the emergence of the covert sphere in American life. It's become more and more clear that there's a whole system, a whole environment of policy making that we don't see, and that we carry out things in the world that contradict what we actually say. And so I think the realization of this jarring hypocrisy or contradiction makes it very easy to believe that there is a hidden world behind the curtain. And there is. Now, so I think it's always a danger, as you point out, to be too much of a conspiracy theorist, and I try to avoid that. On the other hand, there's also the danger of the opposite, which is to become a non-conspiracy theorist and believe that everything is just the way it seems to be. So you have to kind of pick your way between the Scylla and Charybdis that those two extremes represent.
Thank
Thank
you. That's
you.
great.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good stuff there. Along those lines, how do you interpret Representative Luna's hearing? How do you feel it's navigating those difficult issues?
It was nice to know that Congress is focusing a little bit on MKUltra. And it's interesting, the angle from which Congress comes at it, which is the declassification of federal records. So when Sidney Gottlieb left the CIA, along with the then director, Richard Helms, they agreed to destroy all the records of MKUltra. That's a federal crime, destruction of federal property. However, it's a much lesser crime than the crimes that were probably documented in those 7 cases of records that were destroyed at Gottlieb's direction. So where do we go from here in terms of looking for more records? I think it's always possible there are records in some other places. The ones that we have actually did turn up in a financial records center that Gottlieb didn't get around to destroying. However, we also have a number of documents that have been released by the CIA about MKUltra, and these documents contain glaring omissions. The whole half pages are completely blacked out. So the other recommendation I made to the committee, other than going to Germany and looking there, is that instead of focusing only on looking for other documents that may or may not exist, we should take a look at the documents we have that have been redacted and try to get the CIA to release the full text of them. So in that sense, there still is more to discover.
Great. And do you feel like now we've got, again, I'm kind of going back to the conspiracy theory angle, but right now we've got a lot of information that is getting put forward, that misinformation and disinformation. And to me, what you've done is so important. And the fact that our government could actually do this to other living human beings is horrific. And so I worry that people that are maybe a little mentally unstable, or that they could be pushed to believing that they're targeted individuals. And so how would you recommend for our audience to really be able to discern and not go over that kind of a cliff?
I wish I had a clear answer to that question, because it's one that I have to confront. Because I wrote the book about MKUltra, Poisoner in Chief, and because I'm sort of associated with that topic, including as a result of this congressional hearing, I get emails from people who tell me that they're MKUltra victims. And Tom O'Neill, the author of another book that touches on MKUltra, who also appeared at the same hearing, told me while we were chatting that the same thing happens to him, probably some of these same people. And it's heartbreaking to me that there's absolutely nothing I can say or do. And I do believe a number of these people are mentally ill. But could there be some in there that aren't, that actually are uh, being targeted or are suffering some of the kinds of things they talk about? It's not beyond the realm of possibility. I'm not able to discern which among them qualifies. So it's painful for me to have to realize that there are people out there who, for one reason or another, feel themselves targeted. And to what degree that is based on reality, and to what degree it's based on what's inside people's heads, I can't answer. I will say that it's very interesting that when you become focused on some kind of a bizarre thing happening to you, or on something happening in the covert sphere in our government, you associate it with the name MKUltra. It's become a kind of a code word for what's happening out there that's really nefarious and nobody understands. Uh, so in that sense, it's kind of a cultural turnaround, because the idea that there could be such a thing as mind control comes in large measure from culture, from all those stories and movies and books, and all those things about how you drop a pill in somebody's drink and then they walk into the embassy and steal all the files and give them to you, or you swing a watch in front of somebody's eyes and then they go out and kill someone for you. So I think it was that kind of cultural conditioning that led these CIA officers to believe it and pursue this MKUltra project. And then what happened at the end is that MKUltra, which itself was fueled by popular culture, wound up fueling popular culture. And it turns up now in all kinds of movies and novels. So it's been a kind of a full circle, and it's brought MKUltra into a kind of a generalized term for the worst part of the covert sphere in America.
Yeah, it's even in old Bugs Bunny cartoons of the German doctors putting the tinfoil cap with wires to it on the heads and exchanging them to brainwash them and change their minds. Which, yeah, it becomes kind of a chicken or the egg situation of what fuels what, as you alluded to earlier about deprogram a person in order to program them. And you discussed that at the hearing as well, about the activities at McGill and Montreal, correct?
Yeah, so inside the United States and in Canada, the CIA contracted with a number of doctors. And one of the most notorious was this guy, Ewen Cameron, who worked at a psychological institute associated with McGill. And he carried out what wound up to be horrifically disfiguring experiments that destroyed the minds of a number of his so-called patients who came to him for relatively minor complaints. And the Canadian government at least has done a little bit more than the American government in terms of trying to find and compensate the victims of this. The Canadians involved are not satisfied with the extent that the government has fessed up to what happened. But here in the United States, there hasn't been any systematic effort to find those people or to investigate the nature of individual experiments. So I'm hoping that the congressional hearing will set off some continual search rather than simply be a momentary flash, and that remains to be seen.
And then you're always battling, as Erica and you alluded to moments ago, the scenario of people cite MK Ultra for unfounded accusations.
Yeah, I do think there's a group of people fascinated by MK Ultra who are also into UFO landings and the Kennedy assassination and a whole series of other projects that they kind of lump together. I, as you mentioned earlier, try to stay away from that kind of speculation. You know, I find it interesting. Some people have written about Sirhan, or other possible cases. The Unabomber is another one. And so I'm as curious about those as anyone else, but that's not the kind of writing I do. I'm happy to have others do the speculating, but it's another reflection of how MK Ultra seems to have become part of our generalized popular culture. When I was researching my book, I even discovered that year, one of the years while I was writing it, they have in Amsterdam something called the Cannabis Cup for the most powerful or the best pot in the world, and the world champion strain was called MK Ultra. So that shows you how deeply that phrase has penetrated into our culture.
I don't know if that sounds appealing or not, if that would be.
Really, it's scary when you think about it, but I think it just has that allure of the forbidden that makes it
Right.
attractive.
Absolutely. And, you know, you have been in your career, you've been all over the world. You've done incredible research. And what are some of the things that you've learned with your research, especially about our government, that have really kind of stopped you in your tracks, that have just caused you to take pause?
Here's the lesson that I think comes out of MK Ultra and the work I did on Poisoner in Chief. Sidney Gottlieb was probably the most accomplished torturer of his generation. However, by all accounts, he was a sweetheart. He lived in a kind of a eco cabin in the woods. He got up before dawn to milk his goats. He wrote poetry, studied Zen Buddhism. So how can you justify this? How can you put those two sides together? Uh, we don't know because Gottlieb never spoke about it, and and his widow made the children promise never to speak about him. But I think that maybe he might have said that he was doing this, which he said in one of his testimonies he found quite unpleasant, in order to protect freedom in the United States against this horrific enemy, the communism, that not only wanted to crush America, but wanted to make it impossible for meaningful human life to exist on Earth and turn every human being into an automaton controlled by commissars in the Kremlin. So it leads me to this conclusion. Commitment to a great cause is one of the most powerful motivations to commit immoral acts. Patriotism is always held up as one of the noblest of causes. So patriotism can easily be instrumentalized to making people commit crimes or immerse themselves in projects like MKUltra, which by every other standard offend all of their moral principles. It's something to beware of.
Hey, thank you. That's really good. Yes, yes, yes. And how do you personally compartmentalize things?
I tell you, when you're writing a biography, and my book, Poisoner in Chief, is to a certain degree a biography of Gottlieb, uh, you're really living with the person that you're writing about. And my office is quite small, so there isn't much room. It's very crowded. And living with Gottlieb is quite disturbing. Uh, the more I discovered about the project, the more the creepier it became. Um, so I had to tell myself something that I told myself when I was a war correspondent for the New York Times years ago. And I was writing about awful things that happened, and I had to confront them. How do I deal with that? What I always used to tell myself is these things are happening. If you're not here, this same atrocity that you're looking at would have happened anyway. You just happen to be here. So you can't do anything to fix the atrocity, but you could report about it. You could write about it. So do your thing and don't get overwhelmed. And I try to tell myself that with the Poisoner in Chief research, that the point here is to uncover what happened and not allow oneself to be carried away with horror. Now, that said, uh, although I think Poisoner in Chief is the most complete account of MKUltra that exists in public, I'm painfully aware that I have only uncovered a very small portion of what MKUltra was and what Sidney Gottlieb did. Their decision to destroy those records actually wound up being very effective. And I still believe, as I said earlier, that there's more out there to be discovered, and I hope the congressional investigation will help lead to that.
And that in itself invites speculation as well. Yes, it does.
It'll be interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. I think there's a question to me of how seriously the committee, which is focused on declassifying government records in general, is going to want to focus on MKUltra, because there are a number of other areas as well. I suppose the committee itself would have to decide what are going to be their priority areas for investigation. And the change of politics in the House of Representatives might change the makeup of these committees and their agendas as well. So I think it's all uncertain what's going to happen next. But I do think there's a growing awareness in Washington that MKUltra represents something dark that happened, particularly when it was at its height in the 1950s, and that there's never been any real light shown on this chapter.
Not to the extent it warrants, no. I think an argument can be made that some researchers have done a good job in carrying the inquiry into things like Guantanamo Bay and things like that. But I certainly agree with you that such a small percentage can be obtained for verification that it's that in itself is concerning. Yes, sir.
In the mid 1970s, you'll remember there were congressional investigations of the CIA, very highly publicized. When I was writing Poisoner in Chief, I got in touch with one of the senators who served on the Senate Intelligence Committee and was involved in this investigation. That was Senator Gary Hart from Colorado. And I asked him why the committee didn't concentrate on MKUltra. And he said, well, first of all, a lot of the details of it and the breadth of it were unknown. We didn't understand it all. Secondly, there were Republicans on the committee who were afraid that it would be used to tar past administrations, particularly it was a Republican administration when MKUltra was at its peak. And as he put it to me, there was also a sense that MKUltra was kind of a boys will be boys thing with a lot of crazy pranks, and it didn't really merit too much focus. And of course, in the end, there were also fears it would be too embarrassing. So for all of these reasons, the committee, by not deciding to investigate, decided, in effect, not to investigate. And I think what this congressional committee is trying to do is see if it could pick up some of that fallen standard and raise it up again and see if we can bring this subject back under the investigative lens again.
Thank you. It is such an honor. It's a pleasure to talk with you. And I have to say, I'm a Utah girl, and I live here where the Dugway sheep, the incident happened.
Oh.
And I actually lived at Dugway the first year of my life. My father was in the military, and it was amazing to see the way the government tried to completely ignore, downplay, for decades that happened at Dugway.
There are a lot of untold stories at Dugway, and they overlap with MKUltra in some bizarre ways. Well, it's been good to be with you.
Thank you.
And it's a fascinating subject to plunge into. It was fun.
Thank you
you
so much. Have a wonderful night.
Okay, you too.
Bye-bye.
It's always great to have you joining us, as well as a guest like Stephen Kinzer. We appreciate your interest and support. Erica, what were your thoughts about Mr. Kinzer's observations and insights?
Well, I know for me personally, I could have talked to him for days, actually, and I hope that we can get him back to join Expanding Frontiers research, because there is so much information. And toward the end of the conversation, the potential correlation between Dugway and MKUltra, of course, has me very curious about that. I also it was good to hear him talk a little bit about the conspiracy kind of angle and how you really have to guard yourself, because there are, as we know, we've talked about this for 4 years, happy anniversary, but we know that there are, I mean, you can go down a very slippery slope, and because you've got people that are promoting, disinformation, misinformation, that are glomming onto things that potentially have been seeded by the intelligence communities, it really is kind of hard to keep your bearing, to get your bearing, when you learn some of this stuff. So I really appreciated his insight about that.
Yes, it is. And it does take professional journalists, I feel like, to be able to navigate some of that. I feel like in my writing about it over the years, I may have swayed in some different directions prematurely, or gotten overly enthusiastic sometimes as I was learning things. And I feel like people like Sharon Weinberger, I mention occasionally, Stephen Kinzer, I think they provide some good formats for how you have to get verification. And these topics are interesting. They warrant investigation and research. We do just have to be careful and responsible about how we address them and what we assert. And we arguably aren't seeing that from some of our representatives on Capitol Hill, as you and I discussed with Allison and Tanner in our recent The Politics of UFO Disclosure episode.
Right. Yeah, it is, and it's an interesting thing for those of us who have been in this topic forever, and have watched as ideas get seeded into the narrative, or as things as horrific as MKUltra is used to create fantasy and to also distract, and then to also insert other topics into that, like the vaccines and vaccine disinformation and things like that. And so it'll be very interesting to see if the people that are really wanting to look into this, what if they're going to go the distance, and if it's going to be, if it will be turned into something that is going down other routes, which I hope is not the case. I really hope that there is some good information coming out about MK Ultra.
And it does get very complicated. Like, there is a circumstance where the CIA used a vaccination ruse to go into, I believe it was Pakistan, and get blood samples from children during its hunt for Osama bin Laden, which was just a horrible idea, absolutely horrendous. That when that was discovered, of course, made people fearful of mass vaccination programs, of outsiders, of international aid that's supposedly there to help. And I bring this up in the context of Representative Luna and some of her implications about vaccines as some type of covert experimentation, that it's really easy to start conflating all of this stuff and come up with conspiracies and unfounded accusations. I've even been hesitant to talk about that CIA operation in Pakistan, because it just leads right into, oh, we'll see there. Well, then, well, no, that doesn't mean anything about a vaccination at your local pharmacy. It doesn't mean anything about it at all.
Well, and the scary thing is, as we know, I mean, vaccinations save lives. They, I mean, they're incredibly important, and it really, pains me to see people that aren't, are they are looking at misinformation, or some crank that is pretending he's got a medical degree out there and promoting some sort of magic, bullet, which, when you look at, what's going on behind the scenes, who owns these companies? Why would they want to be doing that? We did, that during COVID, where our state leaders bought, I believe, ivermectin. I mean, a lot of money on ivermectin, which was never distributed. And I think we pretty much quickly learned about that. But it's just, it's sad that, you have that kind of erosion of science. But then, as you're mentioning, you've also got the aspect that, while there are these covert, programs, and so that does make people hesitant. But I will tell you what, I get my vaccines and I'm good so far. So.
And as you said, we could just talk to him for hours about really any given project or sub project with MK Ultra. Like, there was Martin Orne and the hypnosis exploration. And one of the things that gets interesting about all that again makes it difficult to really get under a glass of what was illegal, what was unethical, what was the culture at the time, because the doctors published a lot of what they were doing. Now, not all of it, obviously, but Martin Orne had a lot of published papers that, although the MK Ultra files are gone, many of them, like you were saying, some of it can be discerned from research papers and things in institutional libraries and stuff like that, as well as it was just unclear what they could publish and what they couldn't at times, where other times I'm sure it was much more clear that, Ewen Cameron was not to report the horrific aspects of psychic driving publicly, for example. But yeah, there's, pardon the pun, so much gray area in all of it.
Yeah, there really, really is, and it does make it, um, uh, a fascinating and horrific topic all at once. And you and I over the years have looked into different, like BYU looked into the Ewing Airing Institute, excuse me, and different things that have potentially been, areas of interest here in my state. And I find, there could be some gems out there with regard to that. So it's
Yes, and he brought up a very fair point of you can go overboard with the conspiracy theories, but there's also the danger of becoming gullible and not looking, expecting people, accepting people's claims on faith. And just because they're an authority figure or just because they told you something, accepting that as well. When there are circumstances, Dugway, for example, we could name many that it just doesn't add up. And when we put the time frame with it and the activities, and like I asked him about, we have Bluebird and the Hillenkotter regime then of CIA. Then we have Artichoke with Smith, and as Dr. Jeffrey K wrote about, just horrific things going on in Germany that dovetail with what Stephen Kinzer found in Germany as well.
It's all very interesting. It is very dark. And so I was happy to hear, him talk about how he's able to deal with some of that darkness, as being either a medical professional or a frontline reporter. I can't even imagine, the things that you witness, and digging into some of these despicable acts has got to be very challenging. So that was great to hear his feedback on that.
Yes, it was. Any closing thoughts for you?
My closing thoughts are that I just am incredibly proud to be a part of Expanding Frontiers Research. And for me, getting into early on some of the UFO stories, some of the conspiracy stories, going down different rabbit holes, to be able to work with you, Jack, has been very grounding. And it has really helped not only me as a person, but it's helped my work and my research. And I appreciate your interest in Guantanamo Bay and in MKUltra and some of these things that really do affect all of us that we need to be aware of. And I feel I look forward to the next 4 years of Expanding Frontiers Research. And I also want to just give a shout out to everybody that supports our organization, who has donated and who has been with us every step of the way. And welcome all the new people who have found us. It's because of you that we do this. We've created and helped build a community out there with people that I'm really excited to be associating with. And I love this. I love doing what I do, and I'm grateful to all of you out there listening and who support us. And I'm grateful to you, Jack, for being such a great partner.
Thank you, Erica. I echo your feelings of being proud of Expanding Frontiers Research and proud and honored to have worked with you for 4 years. And this is an exciting time for Expanding Frontiers Research. We're celebrating during August our 4-year anniversary. Find details of programming and the celebration at the Expanding Frontiers Research Patreon account. I also encourage you to follow us on Blue Sky, where we regularly post about things that are going on, videos, articles. We have a project coming up, the Interactive Research Project, that is going to be a lot of fun. I encourage you to learn about that. And if you're in a position to help financially support us, please do so at our GoFundMe. We are a verified public charity, or at the EFR Patreon. You'll find all these links in the YouTube video show description. And thanks again for joining me, Erica.
Thank you. I'll see you next time, Jack.
And thanks to all of you at home. We really appreciate you.